Hello everyone, this is Sala and you're watching Smart Code. I am back with another interesting application on JavaScript, and this time we will program automated image slider. In the previous tutorial I showed you how to program image slider using previous and next button, but this time our image slider is automated. Now in this application you will learn two important concepts. Number one, you will learn how to execute JavaScript as soon as web page is loaded. The slider is automated, so we need to start it as soon as the page is loaded, right? So you will learn how to do that. You will learn how to execute JavaScript as the page is loaded. And number two, you will learn how to program setInterVal function. SetInterVal is actually used to call a function at a specified interval. For example, in this application, our setInterval function is set to 1.5 seconds. So after every 1.5 seconds, a slide function is called and you see a different image. Right, so this application is not so difficult to program and I hope you're gonna like this tutorial. And don't forget to subscribe to Smart Code, like the video, and leave the comments. So let's jump into the code and start writing this application. So here you see my Visual Studio code. I have three files, one for HTML, one for JavaScript, and one for CSS. And I have a folder named img, and in that folder I have all the images. I named my images in alphabetical order like A, B, C, D, and E. And let me show you an image. So the size of the image is 600 into 400 pixels. And not only this image, all the images have the same size. So you can use any program to adjust the size of the images and whatever the size you like. I am using 600 into 400 pixels. And why adjusting the size is important, I've already discussed in the previous tutorial. So check the tutorial image slider with previous and next button for more information. Right, so that was the image and now we will start with the HTML. So in the HTML we only need two elements, one for application title and one for image. So let's code the HTML. Right, so this is all HTML we need for this application. Now in our image element we can see I have put our first image. So at the time when we are developing this application we need a single image so that we can fix the layout and the CSS. And once we have a layout or the CSS, I'm going to remove this image from here. And then we will use JavaScript to control the src attribute of the image tag. Right, so HTML is ready and this is the result in the browser. Right, let's now put some CSS and style this application, and there won't be so much CSS because the application is very simple. So link the CSS file first to the HTML, and so now we are going to put some style in our CSS file. Reset padding and margin in the universal selector, and apply a background color to the body. You can have whatever color you like. I'm applying light gray. And now adjust the title of the application. Let's now look the changes in the browser. Right, so now I'm going to put this image to the center and will apply some rounded corners using image radius property. And so let's now target this image container in the CSS and apply the width of 600 pixels. The width of the image container is exactly the same as the width of the images, right? And now I will put the container to the center of the page. And finally, I will target the image element and will apply border radius. Right, so we have our CSS ready. So let's refresh the page and check the result. And so here we go. You can write more CSS and put more styles to the application if you want. And I see a typo in the application. That should be slider. So let's fix it. And now we have CSS for the image element. We can now remove the image, right? We will use the JavaScript to put image here. And one last thing here is the including of JavaScript file. So in the JavaScript, we will start with defining some resources. So the first resource are the images. We will first get all the images in the JavaScript and put them in an array. So let's program it. Right, so we now have all the images in an array, and here are the indices. Our first image is at index 0, second is at index 1, and the last one is at index 4. And in addition to these images, we need some variables. And these variables are going to control the slideshow. So let's create them. Right, so now we have three variables. The first image variable is pointing to the first image as the index of the first image is 0, and the last image variable is pointing to the last image, here the index number 4, right? And this rotate variable is gonna rotate the images. So now we have all the resources ready. Let's now program it further and finalize it. And so now I'm going to show you how to execute JavaScript as soon as the page is loaded. The event that we use for this purpose is actually called DOMContentLoaded, and you can listen for this event on the window object or the document object. So let's now listen the DOMContentLoaded event to the document object. So what we're doing here, we are listening to this content loaded event to the document object. So what does it mean? It means this event, content loaded event, fires as soon as HTML document is completely loaded and parsed. And this is what we needed. We need an event that fires when the document is loaded. And when the event fires, this slide function is called. So let's now define the function. So we only need this slide function, and all the code goes inside it. And before we start coding this function, let's try to get the whole picture. This content loaded event fires only once when the document is loaded. And when it fires, this slide function is called, and this function is going to put and rotate the images. So when it is called first, you will see the first image. And in order to see the next image or the next to next image, we need to call this function again and again after a specified interval. So we need a mechanism to call this function again and again when the document is loaded. And that mechanism is actually called setInterval function, which is used to repeat a piece of code at specified time. For example, 1 second, 2 seconds, and so on. So before we code the logic in the slide function, let's first manage to call it after some time using the setInterval function. Now I'm coding the setInterval function, and here we go. So you see the intelligence feature of the VS Code is helping us with the syntax. So what you see here is a set interval function, which is an inbuilt function in JavaScript. And you can code this function in several different syntax. And I will show you in a couple of minutes. Let's first try to study this function. So the set interval is a function, and this function actually calls another function that you see here after specified time. Let me set the time first. It will make more sense. Time is set in milliseconds, right? 1500 millisecond means 1.5 seconds. So after 1.5 seconds, set interval function is called, and that function calls another function that you see here. It's actually an arrow function in JavaScript. If you have no idea of the arrow function, you can replace it with the anonymous function like this. Right now it will give you more clear picture. After 1.5 seconds, set interval function calls anonymous function. So when the anonymous function is called, we are going to make another call from here to our slide function. Right, so you see the calling cycle, how functions are calling each other. Our slide function is called once when the document is loaded, and after that it is called after every 1.5 seconds. right? So this part is done. Let's now code the slide function and finalize this application. Start with the image tag and get it in the playground because we need to access its source attribute. Now we have the image element. Let's assign it the first image. Right, so the value in the rotate variable is 0 and at index 0, so we have our first image. So if I refresh the page, you will see the first image in the browser. Right, so here you see the page is loaded, the content loaded event is fired, the slide function is called once, and the image is placed. Now after the first calling to the slide function, when the page is loaded, our setInterval function will start calling the slide function after every 1.5 seconds. So as the second call is made by the setInterval function, so what we're gonna do, we will increase our rotate variable by 1. So when the second call is made, the value in the rotate variable becomes 1, and at index 1, so we have our second image, right? And our variable get increased after every call. It will then become 2, 3, and 4, and 4 is the last valid index, and that means we need to stop our rotate variable as the value becomes 4. And not only stop it, we need to set it back to the 0 so that we get the rotation start from 0 to 4 and then from 4 to 0. So all we need to do is just code a simple condition. Right after the increment in the rotate variable, I will code an if condition. And we would say here if rotate is greater than the last image. If this is the case, and say set rotate variable back to the first image. That's it. Our automated image slider is now ready. Let's now run this application. We need to refresh the page, wait, and here we go. And the last one, and again the first one, right? So that was the simple application, and I hope you learned something from it. I will see you in some other student projects, and thanks for watching.